Good afternoon. Good evening. Hello. Hello. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Come in. Let's get started. I apologize for being 4 minutes late, but that's what happens whenever um, I'm not prepared for everything. I'd like to welcome everyone to the class tonight. As Paul mentioned last week, you're going to have a different Paul. So he is off on 2 months of vacation or something like that, and so we are happy that he is able to do that. And in the middle of, or at the end of his time, you've got a bunch of elders that are going to try to do as half a decent job as what he's been able to do. You all been around Paul enough to know that he's kind of brilliant. So, oh, there's Paul. I didn't realize you were here, Paul. Man, I said all that stuff with you here. Man, I can't get out of it now, can I? Well, I'd say that to your face too, so. But I'd like to welcome everyone now. We elders have decided to let Paul continue to do his study on Daniel, so he gets to have the fun part of that whenever he comes back and starts teaching. We decided to take it a little bit different way of teaching, and we're going to teach, some of us are going to teach Proverbs. So you've got me this week. I have no idea who's going to be doing this week, next week. It may be me. We're still trying to flesh the schedule out because Paul just said you all go do it, and here we are. So, like I said, we're going to be doing Proverbs, and I have decided that we'll start out with wisdom. We're probably going to have a lesson or two about wisdom, family in there. Don't really know what else is going to be discussed. I'm sorry that I can't give you a foreshadowing, but we're going to go over wisdom tonight. And because I don't know what else is going to be taught, I think that we probably should look at Proverbs overall. And so Proverbs is 31 chapters. There are 5 different kinds of Proverbs. You see 4 of those kinds in Proverbs itself. The one that you don't see is historical, I believe. You have at least 3 authors, 2 forms of wisdom literature, and 1 purpose. I did it that way just because it seemed cool. So that's what we've got. And we're going to go over the types. Historical, a general truth or idea based on a historical event. This is the one type of proverb that we will not see in the book of Proverbs. Metaphorical, we have a description of nature or life applied to another. Example of that is Proverbs 19:13. A foolish son is ruin to his father, and a wife's quarreling is continual dripping of rain. I put that in here knowing that Michelle was not going to be in here. So if y'all want to tell on me later, that's fine. There's a riddle, which is a need of a deep thought to understand exactly what's going on. Proverbs 30 and verse 4 is the start of one of those. And then allegorical is an abstract idea in narrative, dramatic, or pictorial form. Proverbs 9:1. Wisdom has built her house. She has hewn her 7 pillars. That is a different type of proverb. Then the last one is instructing in morals, religion, and behavior. And you see that mostly in the first 9 chapters of Proverbs. So authorship. Who wrote Proverbs? What's that? Solomon is the one, okay. I heard another one. So we do have Solomon. A lot of people think that Solomon wrote all of them until you get to chapters 30 and 31. But what is odd about all of this, and just to let you all know, I used a book, Proverbs, Wisdom for All Ages, by a man, Thomas Seals, and evidently he taught, it wasn't Freed. Where was it? Lipscomb. Okay. So Paul had at least one class with this person. But I'm using this, and he brought up a really good point. So in chapters 10, 1, 10, and 25, it starts out, each one of them saying something to the effect of the Proverbs of Solomon. If it was continual from 1 through 25, why was it stated that these are Proverbs of Solomon? We don't know, but it's just something to think about. And maybe there are more than 3 authors. Lemuel was the author of Proverbs 30, and we see that in verse 1. Agar is the author of Proverbs 31, and that is the one that I always go to whenever someone asks about women's role and why do we think women shouldn't do anything. You take a good study of Proverbs 31 and you will see the woman is extremely important and very busy. We actually had a discussion about this on the way home last Wednesday night. Shelby, my youngest, was teaching the class in the high school room. The boys and girls are split up. One of the girls asked Shelby, "Why wasn't Jesus a woman?" And so there was a lot of discussion around that. And I told Shelby, because we were discussing things about women and how they didn't do a whole lot. And I said, well, if you look at Proverbs 31 and read that, you will see that they did a great deal. And they were very important. The date of Proverbs. Anybody have a guess while I take a drink of water? So according to W.F. Albright, the contents of the entire book was probably pre-exile. So Paul has talked a lot about the exile with Daniel, and he seems to think that it's pre-exile, but that it was transmitted person to person like so many other stories or historical events orally until about the 5th century BC. Now that's one good thing. Eisfeld said that it's post-exile. And he thinks that it was not put together until at least the 4th century BC, stating Proverbs betrays Grecian and Aramaic words. There's a lot of debate about when this was put together. It really doesn't matter in the long run. I just thought it was interesting that you've got 2 scholars out there saying completely the opposite thing. So the purpose of Proverbs. I've often wondered why Parker messes with this on Sunday mornings all the time. I told Jason, though, with glasses and a hearing aid, I don't know what else can go behind my ear. The purpose of Proverbs, and we're going to get into this a little bit more, but this right here is a good quick summary. To know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding, to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, judgment, and equity. And I'll let you read the rest of it. Like I said, we were going to get more into this. So I've got this concerned with man. How many people can, off the top of their head, tell me how many Proverbs discuss the temple? What'd you say, Sarah? Probably zero. The nation of Israel was never mentioned in the book of Proverbs. No obligations of temple worship are found in Proverbs. I thought that was interesting. You know, as I have read Proverbs, I've never thought of either one of those two things. I just found it interesting. Throughout the Proverbs, though, you do see that God is the Father of all nations. We know that. And so these Proverbs are not just for Israel. They're for everyone. And if you think about it, you couldn't go around to other nations and say, okay, what do you think is good? What do you think is bad? And then put it all together and come up with some kind of average of what good is and what bad is. Because we know that the other nations were sacrificing to idols that they shouldn't. They were sacrificing their children, all kinds of things that they thought were good, but were against God's law. And as you look at this, as you look at Proverbs, you'll see that morality is something for each person. So, you know, whenever we were talking about the wife sounding like, her quarreling is like a dripping roof, that is that person acting like that. Whenever you're reading a proverb, that is something for me to internalize. And if it's good, then that's something that I need to do. If it's directed toward a fool, then that's something that I don't need to do. It wasn't directed toward Israel as a nation. It was really something for each individual to look at. And as we look at Proverbs and the various Proverbs out there, you see three classes of man. What are they? Two of them should be fairly simple. we've got the wise or the righteous man. If you wanna write these down so you can look at them later, chapter 10, verses 1 through 3. You have the simple, which is chapter 9 and verse 4. So the righteous are those with high ethical qualities, attitudes of fear or reverence toward God. The simple, they are misled by their foolishness. However, with discipline, they do have hope. And then the fools, which is the same proverb as the first one, they lack the perception necessary to guide them in the paths of righteousness. Any questions or comments before I go on? In chapter 9, and in chapter 8, you start seeing personifications. In chapter 9, I was going down through there and looking at wisdom, which is what we should all strive toward, versus folly and what the fool does. I found it very interesting to read the first half about wisdom, and the second half about folly, and see how they are so dissimilar, so opposite. So in wisdom, if you look there, I should have had this pulled up. Wisdom has built her house, she has hewn her 7 pillars. She has slaughtered her beasts, she has mixed her wine, she has set her table. So my first bullet point up there, I'm saying that she's a worker. You know, she's doing what she needs to do. She's already built a house, so she's got shelter. She's putting food on the table, so she's taking care of the household. So she's doing things. She provides. As we talked about, she's putting food on the table. She's mixing the wine. And then she tells the simple, so remember the simple are the people that aren't lost. If they listen to reason, they will they'll understand what God is asking them to do. And she is telling the simple how God wants them to live. While she's busy doing other things, though, she is sending out young women to go to the high places to call people in. If we look at folly, we see that she's lazy. So if you look down at verse 14, she sits at the door of her house. Before that, in verse 13, it says she's loud, she's seductive, and knows nothing. Not a whole lot of redeeming qualities about folly. So I say she's lazy because all she's doing is sitting there. She tells the simple the easy, sinful way. So if you read down a little bit more, she is talking about stolen water is sweet and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. Stolen water is sweet. So the people that she's talking to, those simple people, she's trying to get them to not work for anything. You know, it's easy to go and steal something and take some bread and go somewhere and eat it. So she is presenting an easy way of life, but the problem is that her way leads to Sheol. And so if you look a little bit down, the last verse, but he, being the simple, does not know that the dead are there, that her guests are in the depths of Sheol. Dennis.
Going through the personifications, when I've studied Proverbs before, I added another two juxtapositions. Those who seek righteousness, those who entice to sin.
Mm-hmm.
But it looks like you're covering that in wisdom and folly. You're basically using those as an umbrella.
Yeah, you could very easily have done it the way you're doing, and Dennis is just saying that he's gone about this in a different way of, you got the juxtaposition of wisdom over here, you've got folly over here, who's doing right, who's doing wrong, different ways that you can dice and slice this. It's just that's how I decided to do it on this one.
And it's interesting to me that how often the bullies, they want to draw others into their foolishness. They want to entice them into their foolishness.
Yeah. So again, if you didn't hear Dennis, he's saying folly is always trying to pull people in to follow them. And if we look at the devil, I mean, that's what he's trying to do as well today. He must be an extrovert because he wants everybody to go to hell with him. Misery loves company. So, any other questions or comments? Yes, Sandy. Right. Yeah, right. And so for everybody online that couldn't hear Sandy, she's talking about how parents are teaching their children. If you're wanting them to go to heaven, you're teaching them hard work is the way to go, and you're doing that by example. It's funny that you mentioned that. I was actually talking just last night to a young man that is kind of close to my family, and how you should be that example. You may not know everything in the Bible, but you can always set the biblical example for your children. That's something that I've always struggled with. I don't think that I'm the smartest person in this room or any room most of the time, but at least I can try to lead by example. And that's kind of what Sandy was talking about. Anything else? Okay, we're not going to go through all of this, but I put it in the slide deck in case anybody wants it. And what is wisdom? And Proverbs 1:7. I am going to read this one because we're going to talk about this one a lot. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. We're going to dissect this as we go through the class, but this is kind of where it all starts. It talks about fearing the Lord, and that's the beginning of all knowledge. Proverbs 9 and 10 says almost the same thing. It says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And so we're going to discuss fear and what that means. And this is where an inexperienced person and a more mature person, that's where the more mature person needs to help the inexperienced person. I'm not telling you to be scared. The Bible isn't telling you to be scared. There is a biblical fear that we all understand, but the people outside of the religious world as a whole may not understand this. Fear is not the wicked man's fear. And I have a different, so I've got Isaiah 57:20 and 21 up there, but I have a different one in my notes that I want to read. I don't want to read that one right now. We'll do that one later. But it is not a wicked man's fear. A wicked man fears what God is going to do to them. He fears, is the law going to get me? That's the wicked man's fear. The fear of calamity. A really good example of this is King Ahaz. So King Ahaz had a prophet come to him and say, y'all are good. Don't do anything. Assyria is not going to bother you. Well, King Ahaz didn't take that to heart. What he said is, I don't know about that. You know what? Let me go here and go to Syria. Let me get on their good side. God had already told him through the prophet, don't worry about anything. But King Ahaz did not take that to heart. He went and buddied up with people that he wasn't supposed to. King Ahaz should have feared the Lord and not what another nation was going to do to him. And that's what I mean by fear of calamity there. It's also not a fear of judgment. Judgment Day. What does that bring to your mind? What's that? Sheep and goats, okay. I cannot remember the movie back in the 80s. I think it was the 80s. Demi Moore wasn't Terminator. No, it was a bit more Bible based than that one. But Demi Moore was well, I honestly didn't think about that one. But in that one, they were the producers, the directors, the actors. They were all trying to stir up this fear of what the last day is going to be. And I can't remember much of it because it was not a good movie. Because it was not about the Bible. It was all about fear-mongering. And that's what they were trying to do, is they were trying to scare people about, well, this is what God teaches in the Bible. And they were looking at Revelation in the apocalyptic language that is there. And it was all around this fearful expectation of judgment. Hebrews 10:26-27, when we sin willfully, whenever we sin willfully, that's whenever we should fear. Because if you're rejecting Jesus as a Savior, what hope do you have? Contrast that with 1 John 4:17, where he says, we may have confidence for the day of judgment. Godly fear should not be a fearful expectation of judgment. Any questions or comments? Yes.
When I think of a biblical
So if you couldn't hear Dennis, wait just a minute because we're going to get to all that in just a moment. But what Dennis was saying was there's all kinds of things that make up biblical fear. You've got reverence, and we'll go through it here in just a minute. I just happen to go with fear is not first. So biblical fear is to stand in awe of the Lord. Excuse me. Malachi 2:5 says, in the ESV it says awe. In the New King James Version it says fear. So that word there can be translated either way. It's to honor the Lord. And in this one, the ESV says fear. New King James says reverence. And then lastly on this slide, it's to regard the Lord. So looking at Exodus 9:20 and 21. Then whoever feared the word of the Lord among the servants of Pharaoh hurried his slaves and his livestock into the houses. But whoever did not pay attention to the word of the Lord left his slaves and his livestock in the field. So you've got all of these bad things going on in Egypt. Who here, whenever they hear a tornado warning siren, the Websters can't hear that, by the way, in Georgetown. So I've got to call them or something and hope that they're still up. Of course, now with baby Grace, and I guess y'all are up a lot more often, aren't you? But how many of you that hear a tornado siren is not going to go inside? Well, you've got all of this bad stuff going on in Egypt. And the smart ones are saying, you know what, I'm checking out. Everybody, let's get inside. We'll shut the door. They don't have TV, so they can't turn TV on, but they're being protected. The fools in this story are saying, I can read the sky. The tornado's not coming. I'll be okay. So biblical fear is made up of awe, honor, and regard. Dennis can name several other things that he put in his that are not part of this, but that is biblical fear. It's not to be afraid, but it's to show honor and regard to Lord Almighty. Questions, comments? Excuse me? That was it. The Seventh Sign. That was not a good movie. And I kept thinking, if they were to just read the Bible, this could be a pretty good movie. But it was not. So, okay, we've got the fear of the Lord. We know what biblical fear is versus non-biblical fear. I don't have a clock up there, so I'm having to look at my watch. I apologize. But what does that fear lead to? You don't fear just to be fearing, right? Fear of the Lord leads to works of righteousness. We're not going to go through all of these because I'm going to run out of time. But they're up there if you want to read them. It leads to serving God. Joshua 24:14. Now therefore fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and faithfulness. True biblical fear should get you going. It should get you wanting to do what God wants you to do. And it should make you want to turn away from evil. Job 28:28. And he said to the man, behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to turn away from evil is understanding. I'm going to give you all just a little bit of an insight. I knew whenever I stood up here, I either had 10 minutes worth of material or it was going to be like 2 weeks. I'll let y'all guess which one it is. So, wisdom. Wisdom is old. What could I possibly mean by this? Say it again, Sarah. Before the world was formed. Proverbs 8:22 and 23. The Lord possessed me at the beginning of his work, the first of his acts of old. Ages ago I was set up at the first, before the beginning of the earth. So the Hebrew word there, kana, according to Strong's, that's how you pronounce it. Paul will tell me in just a minute that I did not get that right. Can be translated as create or possess. So, here's the question. Did God create wisdom? Part of his character. Somebody else said something. God is wisdom. Any other comments? Okay. Dennis said it's always existed because it's part of God's character. I just thought it was a neat little question to ask. But it does get you thinking, B.
Well, just like God is love, that's what he is. So he has always existed, those characteristics.
So B says God is love. So he didn't create love. It's part of God, so it's always been there. So one of those characteristics. Again, I just thought it was kind of fun to noodle on. Wisdom is more than just knowing. I may know something, but if I don't act on it, am I wise? So I put up this little formula. Knowing plus doing equals wisdom. Somebody might want to check my math because I wasn't a great math scholar. But knowing something does not make you smart. There's all kinds of scientists out there in the world, and they talk about the universe is this old, and it had to happen because of this, and we don't have any dinosaurs because of, whatever the flavor of the month is. They think they know something, but they aren't wise. Knowing not to kill somebody is a sin. That's good. But if you go out and kill somebody, are you wise? No, you're not. So that's why I've got that formula up there. Knowing plus doing equals wisdom. So there's got to be some action behind what I know. Dennis.
I'd expand the equation just a little bit. I'd say knowing the difference between right and wrong, plus choosing the right thing, plus doing the right thing equals wisdom.
See, that's why I was in pre-algebra in college, and he was over here in algebra, calculus, or whatever. True story, I started in college in remedial math because I knew that I had to get to calculus at some point, and I knew I wasn't going to get there just what I knew. True story. Any other comments? I see some smiles out there because I bet that I show this every now and then. Any other questions or comments? Yes, John. Yeah, and so what John is saying, if you couldn't hear him, and for everybody online, he's expanding my math equation even more. So you got knowing and doing, but you've also got to have the experience. And that's actually in a few slides down in here. So if you get me next week, maybe we'll get to this. But John, you're exactly right, and that's part of knowledge, is getting that experience. Okay, that's the second bell. I'm sorry, I'm not Paul Spicer. Hopefully Paul Glenn was okay tonight. Any other questions? Okay, thank y'all very much.